Are you still working with Athletes for Care?
Yeah, so we're actually relaunching it in the next 2 weeks. It took a slight pause during COVID, and then we're kind of
Hmm.
rebranding it, and I wouldn't say it, yeah, some bit of a new direction through psychedelics. So mainly we were heavy on the cannabis early, and then COVID pumped the brakes, lost some funding, and now we got a new donor, ex-NFL player, um, Robert Gallery, that's been doing some pretty interesting stuff with Ibogaine specifically, and
Hmm.
speaking with Congress here. So we're gonna kind of relaunch it through that lens in the next couple weeks. So.
That's exciting. And
hmm
so, for anybody that maybe hasn't been aware, could you speak to what the mission of Athletes for Care is?
Yeah, I think the essence of it is athletes at all levels, no matter where you landed up or how it played out, but just using the sports platform to do good, to be of service in the community, and really kind of get back on your feet. We deal with mainly retired players or transitioning players. So a lot of these guys deal with identity crisis and figuring out who they are, but also like healing, right? I mean, they leave the game with a lot of injuries and some mental health issues and identity issues. So it's getting them back on their feet. But we all know that, much like yourselves, like the veterans, they got big hearts, they got big spirits, they know how to work, they got a lot of great skills. But it's like, how can we um, help them find a direction? And then a lot of times we're talking about alternative health, just different tools in the toolbox, if you will, that help these guys get back on their feet, but then also can extend the message beyond their story and hopefully help other people along the way. Because as we know, in sports, just across the board, the toolbox is some bit empty, right? I mean, or it's filled up with the wrong tools. So we're speaking for the trees, speaking for nature, speaking for alternatives that needs to be highlighted, but not selfishly for athletes. It's just to really kind of propel the athlete to do good work in their community and be a voice.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful because, I mean, we all have an opportunity to be a leader or somewhat of an influencer in our community, right? But athletes maybe more so than a lot of other people, right? So if they're healthy in the mind and the body and the spirit, then maybe they're better leaders. I think what you touched on there too about like this overlap of the veteran population and the athletes where they have, I mean, man, maybe some have heard this before, but who else? I can't really think of anybody else that has a career in that early, you know?
Yeah, right.
They have their careers, and a lot of people are identified with their careers,
hmm
right? I see it in the military. I've seen it with some of the professional athletes that I work with, and that can lead to some serious challenges when it's time to put that behind and move forward and find a different purpose,
hmm
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, you see this even in like maybe the executive world too, to some degree. Maybe not quite as obvious as athletes or maybe veterans, because it's like you're literally embodying it, on a physical level, and you're living it on a day to day. Not like you wouldn't as a CEO or an executive, but you live and breathe that occupation or that role. And to some extent, a lot of people believe that they are that. They wouldn't know who they were if that job disappeared, or if they were no longer the CEO, or they hang their hat on that title, until it goes away, and then you're kind of forced to reframe and reset to some degree. But yeah, it can be very unhealthy. You don't really understand it until you're dealing with it. Like, even if someone
Yeah.
spoke about it while I was still playing, I'd be like, yeah, 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 I'll play forever. You know what I mean? Just like chalk it up for like you don't know what you're talking about, but until you're like living it, holy shit, like this is a real thing. You're just living in a bubble.
Yeah, those things that you heard a long time ago from some fucking old timer that you're
Yeah,
like, yo, whatever, dude, I'm gonna
yeah,
be different than you. It resonates so much more after when you're like actually in the shit, right?
that's it.
I almost feel like I was working at the D-backs for a little bit, just a brief period, and one of the like veteran pitchers that I met there, uh, shout out Keone, Kayla, that's my boy now. But we would talk about like felt like the league or like the organization, they needed some sort of like men's council or like a mentorship thing, to guide some of these guys, because I think it's almost, sometimes I see it as like the blind leading the blind.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these guys don't have the self-awareness, and they've only been around the sport, or they've only looked at it from that lens, or they're identified with the sport. And so, everything is about performance and the sport, and there's not like this separation. And hey, like, let's talk about the life skills. And I think something interesting comes to mind too, as I think of Aaron Rodgers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
playing with the plant medicines a little bit. And one of his podcasts, after his maybe second ayahuasca ceremony, he was talking to, I'm not sure if it's Aubrey Marcus or Joe Rogan or whoever it was, but about how he felt that actually is what led to his MVP season, right? Which is, it's a crazy unlock, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you hear different versions of that story. I would like to think that being a quarterback is a lot different than being a lineman, or being like a power play specialist versus being a hockey fighter, right? Like, I'm thinking if I had done ayahuasca while I still played, I'd probably come back and not want to be fighting anymore. It's just a different type
Yeah.
of perspective, right? It just shifts life's perspective. Maybe in his situation, like you're the head of the snake as the quarterback, right? And you're in a position where it's purely I don't know how to frame this. Like it's just different. So he's going there, and yes, he's unpacking his life, but I think it creates space for his job, because I'd like to think being a quarterback is probably a lot less strenuous than physically,
Yeah.
being as a lineman, or someone that's been in the trenches there. So I'm not sure. Oh yeah, I'm gonna pack it up and turn my $20 million contract in to go and live in a Maloka somewhere. You know what I mean? I think I can see that being something, and I could see the same thing for very high skilled athletes in other departments too. I hear of Mark Messier, one of the best NHL players ever play, had a run in with mushrooms early on in his life, like 17 or 18. And he talks about how it helped him with leadership skills and really
Yeah.
kind of like carving out that path. So I can see this being a thing. It makes a shitload of sense if you're more courageous, you're a better leader. So you come back to your tribe, your team, and maybe you're speaking a little bit more clearly. Communication's better. Maybe there's ideas there that he came to the team with. Who knows? There's a lot of information that's being spun around upside down, sideways in these experiences. But I'm just thinking. I think for myself. I'm like I couldn't imagine wanting to come out and go and fight for a living after I've experienced that, because it's life changing. It's changed my life, and there's been a lot of things I haven't done since my ayahuasca experience 4 years ago, including drinking alcohol. And I'm like thinking like that would have been a massive shift in the middle of my hockey career. But then I said like I said, like had I been 50 goal scorer, and I was like a skill guy, and you know what I mean, I knew exactly where I belonged on the team, and you just come back and want to be more skilled. Like that would be like the mindset, not be like, oh yeah, because like ayahuasca is not going to make you crazier, and you know what I mean, and more animalistic to go be barbaric on the ice, right? I mean, it's going to soften the heart,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
the different perspective. But yeah, I mean, I'm not shocked that's the way it played out, because there's so much information and there's freedom there once you kind of make peace with your past and your demons, and then there's like this whole world of futuristic visualization stuff, in these spaces that who knows what he was seeing. Maybe he saw himself, in that future sense, and believed it, and then started like the manifestation process. So who knows? But I'm not surprised that something like that played out the way it did.
Yeah, me neither. You touched on something real briefly, and I think that would be helpful. If you're down to talk about it, but dude, before we met and I kind of heard your story, I I hadn't had a lot of experience or understanding about the sport of hockey. I always kind of looked at it as like it's very similar to soccer. That was my sport, minus like we're not getting in fights every freaking match, you know. And you
Yeah.
guys, we're not like smashing each other up against the boards and whatnot. But and I guess like in the '90s, I watched the Avalanche because it kind of bounced around from Colorado and Hawaii. You
Hmm.
know, we were pretty good then, but then we quickly got bad, and so I never watched anymore.
Hmm.
But what talk to me about what is the role of an enforcer? And when you said you knew your role, like how did that manifest for you? How did that come about? You know, did you decide like, hey, that's what hyped you up in that moment and that stage or that version of who Riley was? Or was it like, hey, is it like a team decision? Like, hey, Riley, you're pretty good at this. Yeah, how did that come about and what is that?
Yeah, sure. So the role of the enforcer is essentially a policeman, if you will, on the team. A little bit more of maybe street meat, if you will, because the idea is to protect your teammates, and you're not asking for permission. You're doing it, right? So then there's the refs that regulate the game itself. So we are a version of the referee that self-police the game because the refs can only do so much, and then there's a lot of things that go unchecked behind the play. So cheap shots, so protecting your star players, right? You got 10, $50 million a year players on the team, and you can't have those guys on the shelf because of something you could have prevented. In this example, being a cheap shot of some sort. So you protect the teammates. Obviously, you're defending yourself. You're defending the team. If you're down a few goals, the idea is to generate some energy. So the simplest way to do that would be to go poke, the beehive, which would be somewhere around the goalie. You touch the goalie, you can generate a swarm of bees there pretty quickly and generate a fight. So the idea of generating momentum or some sort of energy. But I think like the essence of it really is to protect your teammates. You're the guy that has to go and get your hands dirty when shit hits the fan, when there's a big hit that someone gets hurt on or someone's taking liberties and someone's running around and acting tougher than they should. It's just like taking it in your own hands because the ref's only calling what he sees. There's a lot of stuff that goes unnoticed, and our job is to go and keep the peace, right? And that's really what we did. We did, and it wasn't something that I ever dreamed of doing. I always dreamed of playing in the NHL as long as I could remember. But my version of playing in the NHL was much like I played it, growing up in youth hockey, was scoring a lot of goals and being the go-to guy, being the man, right? And as you advance to different levels and you play at higher, better players, you realize you're not as good as you thought you were.
Yeah.
Now you're playing with much better hockey players. You're a small fish in a big pond. And I moved away from home when I was 16 years old in the Western Hockey League, and I was never drafted to the NHL. And I only had 20 fights or so in 4 years of junior hockey. And I was looking at the guys getting called up. It was a lot of goals and a lot of penalty minutes. And back then there was still a real significant role for fighters to earn spots on teams. So I decided to do that. No one told me to do it. Being undrafted, I had an opportunity to go pro or go back to junior for another year. And I just said, I'm going to be a fighter. So like just the type of mindset,
Wow.
right? I just shifted the mindset. I was always competitive, so I knew I had that within me, like the competitive nature, because there's no way in hell you could mentally frame it to be a fighter if you don't have that competitiveness, that killer instinct within you.
Yeah.
So that's what I decided to do that off season. I just trained to be a fighter. Actually, I trained to be a bodybuilder, and then thought I was going to be a fighter. So it was just all the ignorance in me. It was just like, oh yeah, let's go get big and let's go get some muscle and go fight these
Yeah.
big guys. So it didn't exactly work in my favor as far as like functionality. I think it may have had an influence on the mindset because I was just like I was all in. The mindset was there, but the functionality. You mentioned the UFC guys earlier on. Like I wasn't thinking like that. There wasn't a whole lot of mindfulness. It was just like let's get crazy, let's get strong, let's get after this and go after guys. So I didn't really realize the functionality piece till a couple years in because I was just lifting heavy and just acting crazy. So no one ever told me to do it. It was just a realization that I had. If I really wanted to live out my dream, I had to, unfortunately, get uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, and that's what I did. Never had any coaches, even when at that point I was now established as a fighter. So the expectation was there that I knew my job and knew my role. So no one had to tell me. If I seen something on the ice or if I sensed something, it was just like, let's go take care of business. And then like early on too in my career, I was just trying to get some street credit. So I was going out there guns a-blazing, just trying to fight anybody and their brother just to get noticed and get on the map. So it just organically took care of itself. But it started with just the desire. It was just really the acceptance of like, this is what you have to do to find your way. You're not gonna make it as a skill guy. You're not gonna make it as the way you thought you were. You're gonna have to get your hands dirty. Otherwise, you're just gonna be in the minor leagues and you're gonna bounce around. So I just acknowledged that, had some acceptance in it. Early on, I had some fun with it. It was a challenge for me. I, believe it or not, some bit enjoyed it early on in my career. Yeah. And then it just got old. It just wears on you emotionally and spiritually and physically, obviously, too. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's not really surprising to hear that you enjoyed it. I mean, I used to enjoy getting in street fights when I was a kid, Mm-hmm. And then you grow up and grow out of that, but like there's something to that adrenaline, and like I think there's something primitive there that, men like to compete, and that is mm-hmm. one way that men like to compete. But I also see the aspect of, especially if it's coming from an unhealthy place, like, you can even see it with a lot of the MMA and UFC fighters, right? Is that if you're coming from a place of I need to validate myself or show how tough I am or whatever, this and that, kind of like you see with Conor McGregor has been recently, or you see a lot of these guys, right? And you would hope that a lot of them, maybe they have more of the strategy, but you would hope a lot of them would have the awareness. And I think you see somebody like, to contrast that with Khabib or George St. Pierre, for example, what a great sportsman,
Yeah, right. And super humble.
He's truly fighting as a way of like mastery and to better himself and whatnot, as mm-hmm. opposed to prove something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, agreed. It's like a martial artist approach versus like, I don't know, like an egocentric, like you said, like got to prove something to everybody type of approach. They could be intertwined to some capacity, because obviously these guys all have true martial arts backgrounds, but the essence of martial arts, right, where there's a humbleness, right, there's like a grounded energy, like, and you said George St. Pierre like represents that. I don't know who could represent that even any better.
Right,
right. Frank Shamrock is a pretty solid, human being and grounded now. But I think I don't see anybody like George, like really, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you didn't know any better, he just guy is like salt of the earth and so connected. But you have to realize, like, I didn't really make sense of like where this was really coming from when I was fighting, right? It was just like, thought it was just like the competitor in me. And I really didn't make sense of the psychology of it all until, after the fact, after I retired and started understanding like the psychology of this, and understanding, the thinking and the mindset, and realizing that I was fighting out of fear. And there was like several different fear bodies that I could, point to, but, one of the big ones was like the fear of letting my parents down, like, just like all this money and
wow.
resources and time, that I can remember growing up and driving to the rink early mornings, how much they dedicated, much of their lives to my dream, wow. And so like letting them down, like, there was like this sense of like, fuck, like how can I let them down, letting myself down, letting, again, this is probably more ego now, is like letting people down, like, because like growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba and Canada, like I was in my age, like, the guy, the hockey player, right? And so like, I don't know, expectations or what, or if it's just expectations of myself, but this idea that I wasn't going to live out my dream, there was like this fear of like not reaching it. So fear, the fear would make you do some crazy things, and then I could look back and in my childhood, I didn't get in many street fights, but I think it was, and I grew up around gangs and stuff. My cousin was a Hell's Angel, around like, a lot of bad dudes, but I was like never like truly a fighter in the sense, but around a lot of that type of stuff. But there was always like this proof, like I need to be as tough as my cousin, I need to be tough as these people, but I didn't really want to do it, just earn the street credit on the street, you know what I mean? So it was like this weird thing, is like you have to fight to prove your homeboys back home that you're tough. It was this weird thing. So all these different fear bodies that I make sense of it kind of after the fact. And I say all this because I've known some UFC fighters and boxers too, and it's survival, right? You're fighting. It's a survival mechanism. You're literally fighting for, just to get out of, whatever situation you're in. Brazil, or like in Brazil, or you're getting out of Rio de Janeiro in the slums or wherever. You're literally fighting out of that, the poverty and whatever else. So it's coming from somewhere, and to me, it sounds like a lot of it seems pretty consistent when you talk to these guys. There's fear bodies that underline it to some capacity, and I didn't really understand it. I was just like, oh yeah, I'm just like this macho guy, and this is who I am. And it's like, no, you're not.
Right.
It's not you. It's a job, but you have to live it. You have to own it, embody it. Obviously, to some degree. Otherwise, you're fluff. I mean, people will call you out and see right through you. So you have to be able to back it up. As tough as you act and as loud as you land up being on the ice, you have to back it up. Otherwise, you're an imposter, and you'll get exposed pretty quickly. So there is a level of embodiment that's required. But the fear bodies, to me, was really where it fueled, where it was fueled from. Yeah.
Man, that resonates with me so much about like how I've operated in my life based off of fucking fear, like mostly fear of people's opinions, right? Like fear of my parents' opinion. I was talking to a former Air Force pilot about this the other day. Like I think you know this, but I don't know if you did, but I'm a pilot, right? And then I changed my career path to become a sports psychologist, and because I finally realized at Wake, actually, shout out Nick, I was like, yo, I'm chasing this thing. It showed me that I was chasing that thing for the approval of my mom. Because it's like a respectable job, I'll earn like good money, whatever, it's something that she can be like, oh, my son's a pilot, And that comes through a lot of conditioning from the past that, I don't want to go into too much, but I see it all the fucking time. And, I think that's something huge that you brought up there. Was that, bro, how did you come to that awareness though?
Of the fear bodies and like the back end, you're talking? Yeah, you know what? I think it's just like, once you start embarking on this spiritual journey, you can't help but make sense of your past and where you come from and start dissecting, maybe parent psychology, your environment, where some things maybe get lost or where some of the programming happens. Just understanding fear, right? And fear, how it paralyzes people. And you hear, some versions of this all the time where, we become our own worst enemy. We limit ourselves and limit our potential. And it's not anybody else really limiting us. It's us. And it's usually a fear body that prevents us, right? And there's always an opportunity. There's always space and freedom on the other side of a fear body. I could go on for days on a few different fear bodies that I've faced in my life, and that one being one of them, public speaking being another, and just like the power that it generates on the backside versus just accepting, well, I'm just scared of that and I won't ever go near it or do anything with it and let it control you. How much space and freedom opportunities on the other side. And it's almost like the universe is testing you. It's almost like challenging you with fear. And like, if there's fear, I'm convinced, like if there's fear, you got to go near it and through it. Otherwise, it's going to keep you small to some degree. So as I start to understand this and fear, like in the future, start to understand, the essence of yogic philosophy and meditation, and presence and the present moment, worrying and fear, right? Worrying and fear. Well, it hasn't happened yet. Like, what are we actually putting our mind on? Where's this energy going? It's going nowhere useful, that's for sure, right? Like a rocking chair is giving us something to do, it gets us nowhere. In fact, it probably gets you sick, a lot quicker by worrying and being in fear. Yeah. So I just started understanding all that and just make sense of fear bodies and how they just limit you from, I guess, spiritual growth and evolution to some capacity. But so now I'm just like, wherever I sense there's a fear, I was like, I got to go do that. I got to go do that. And I'm in the middle of doing my own versions, like opening up the voice, right? As I grew up, like, traditional white boy, like, stiff and, don't express. And, so getting into ecstatic dance and moving
Oh
and like
yeah.
opening up the voice and like actually feeling called to, I don't know if it's like certainly not going to be singing, as entertainment, but, some of the, medicine work I do, getting into I've been chanting for a while, but, getting into more of that and, taking drum lessons for the last 2 years and getting, you know what I mean? Just like opening up these things because it was always about like, well, that's not, like there's that self-talk is like, well, that's not you. You're a hockey player. I was never, in a mindset to say I was creative growing up, but my sister is creative. I'm doing senior all this stuff, and I'm a hockey player. Not even recognizing that hockey is a creative sport. There's a read and react element. It's bob and
Yeah.
weave.
Yeah.
It's creative, and that's what I loved about it. So I'm making sense of what all these things were and are, and making sense of it all. I'm able to communicate and be like, oh man, like I played it so small for so many years, thinking that wasn't for me and that's for artists, and like realizing like we're all creative, right? We're all co-creators with the divine, and that essentially to me is like part of the mission is to be creative. And oh shit, okay, and then we got to like open up these blockages. If I'm teaching yoga and understand yogic philosophy, like there's all these blockages the body's holding on to, and every time you unlock a blockage, there's space, there's freedom there, and taking these understandings and just creating more freedom by facing fear and going after it versus just like being a victim, be like, oh, that's just like something I don't want to go near because it scares me, or I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Obviously, there needs to be calculated risk, but depending on what we're talking about with fear, right? I mean, there are some real fears out there. Fear of falling. If you're hanging off like a building, like I wouldn't say, oh yeah, face your fear by jumping off of it. Like clearly, like that, you got to use some intelligence here, but like the generic fears that hold you back, the fear of like talking to your boss, about something they said, or some beef that's in the workspace, like. By you not saying anything, it's just going to fester. It's just going to morph into something, probably more negative down the road versus like clearing the space. You're fearing it, but it creates space and it creates some, communication and all that good stuff. So, yeah, that's the way I see it now, and just make more sense of it, understanding fear. And it's like fear, I'd say, is a mental disease to some degree, right? It cripples people and it makes people stay small. Is the way I see it now.
Yeah, I love that. It's like the limitations that we place on ourselves, not other people, but our perception or like the anticipation and fear of what might happen. I can't remember his name. MJ's coach. His name is slipping from me, but MJ's mindfulness coach was the same mindfulness to Kobe, and he's coached Phil Jackson and stuff. And he's got a book called Unlocked, and that's what comes to mind. Is like when you're scared. And then I heard you say, like, you got to, once you get past that or go through that, lies freedom. And that's what kind of comes to mind is his concept of, like, when the ego's at play or you're operating from a place of fear and stress or anxiety, you're sort of, like, locked up, you know? And you can't really express and embody fully what you have to give to the moment.
Yep, exactly, and it requires a level of courage, right? Because I'm all for like controlling thoughts, right? And you can shift your thinking, right, and be like, well, to some capacity. Well, just I got 2 young girls, so I say it's nothing to be scared of. Like the monsters are in your head; they're not underneath your bed, right? It's like this idea you can keep telling them, but like. At some point, the courage lies by facing that fear, like, and that's where it's unlocked. It's not just like simply through just thinking it. Like there has to be I think, some level of action that's required when you talk about facing fears. At least the way I see it from these larger ones. I'm not sure you can just snap out of it through just like, oh yeah, I'm just like, I'm not scared of heights anymore. I think there's a level of like you have to go and like front it in real time, like in the physical form, like whatever that looks like, depending on the fear body itself. It's not something you just like snap out of. Courage is required to combat fear. Yeah,
I think the more that I progress on this journey, right, this of personal growth and spiritual development and understanding psychology, everything to me points that what you said earlier is your sort of growth and your freedom lies on the other side of that fear. And you can't like circumnavigate it. You have to
Mm-hmm.
confront it. You have to
Mm-hmm.
go through it. You have to face it. You know, an example for me comes up is you mentioned public speaking, for example, or the fear of confronting your boss or something like that, right? They teach you all these things about like cognitive behavioral therapy and change your thoughts, notice the distortion and then change it or challenge it. And I would pull out all the tools, right? Because I got all these tools in my grad program and whatnot, you know?
Yeah.
And I started doing the fucking box breathing and shit like that. And I'm like, man, this fucking anxiety is not going away. You know, like,
Yeah.
it's not fucking working. I can feel my heart just pounding and pounding through my chest. And I was like, finally, like my time to come and speak to a couple hundred people comes, and I'm like, well, this is what we got. So we just got to accept it and go through this thing and go with it. And as soon as I like switch that slight pivot, you know, of like, I'm just gonna accept what I got.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety's here, fear is here, whatever. We still got a job to do.
That's it.
That's when it went away.
Mm.
It's crazy. It like just dissolved, just like that. And then I
Yeah.
was in the moment. So
Yeah. Think about it if you would have, bailed out because of the fear. Do you like, there's no way it could ever have dissipated. Like
I've
you
done
accept
that
in that
lots.
moment that you're doing it. So
Yeah.
you're all in. So
I almost think
so,
of it too as like approaching, say, I mean, I'm single, I'm not married or anything, right? But say approaching a girl that I'm interested in,
Mm-hmm.
that's a stranger, right? I've seen some crazy statistics these days, man, about like just how much millennials and Gen Z and stuff like that are not dating, or men are afraid to approach a woman and stuff. And I've had that anxiety and that fear.
Sure.
And the only way that I've ever gotten over that is by doing the thing.
Yeah.
And if I don't do the thing, it just perpetuates the fear.
That's
and I'm
it.
like-
Just
and then I
just
beat
right.
myself up. You know, you're like, what would you feel if you didn't do it? I feel like a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
I like shame myself. My internal
Yeah.
dialogue was like, yo, you were weak. You know?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a major sign, it'll keep doing that to you too if you don't address it, right? It just keeps presenting itself in different forms, and then like a week later there'll be two beautiful girls there, and you're not gonna, you're gonna be like, and if you don't act on it, it's gonna be the same thing when like five girls show up. It's like it just keeps like increasing energy. That's the way I see it. So there has to be some level of action.
Would you say, let me ask you something about like just your journey in the path to some of these realizations of the fear bodies and how they were influencing your life. Did that come by, like what came first? Was it, we've talked a little bit about the plant medicine space and whatnot, and maybe we'll get more into that or not. Or did you start learning about yoga and mindfulness and that philosophy before that? Which one, like what inspired the awareness? What was the catalyst for the awareness of how these things were influencing you and that journey?
Yeah, it was a lot, pretty much all at once. I would say the plant medicine, specifically mushrooms, early on when I retired from playing hockey, opened up a completely different perspective of where I was in life, because I had now retired. So mentally, I was like, okay, I'm on the other side of the fence. I'm retired, and it gave me a perspective of like the old Riley, and where I was at that time, which is no longer a hockey player nor a hockey fighter. So I think it had this profound ability to just like allow me to shed the old Riley, if you will, like just like shed that old skin, where I was able to come out of the experience with a completely different perspective on myself and my environment and everything like that. I think that helped me find the yoga mat with a little bit different perspective of yoga, even though I still approached yoga through the cult of the body. Like I didn't understand it at the level I do now, and like the true essence of it is priming the body for meditation, if you will.
Yeah.
It took me a while to really understand like the real deep teachings of it, but immediately, because I was still, you think about it, like I was in meathead mode for 8 years of my life, where lifting like a maniac, getting bigger, just stronger, and in fight mode. to be able to have that realization to approach yoga, to at least soften, to at least try to attempt to bring some sort of balance. Well, that was a starting point. And then, as you can imagine, and I'm sure your story's some bit, in alignment, where it just keeps evolving. Like you just keep practicing and practicing and practicing, and you go deeper into the physical sheath. And then you start, obviously you're breathing too, but you understand pranayama and just the life force energy more, because you're just feeling it and feeling it and feeling it. And then you just keep doing it and doing it. And then you like, I didn't have a meditation practice for the first 2 or 3 years of practicing physical practice of yoga. I couldn't sit still. Like my body was so riddled with tension still and tightness, still, wow. Just not primed for it. And I was like, oh, well, I can't, just like most people I work with now, like, I can't meditate. And I understand why, because the body is riddled with stress and tension. It can't sit still. So I understood why. I would probably never have had one. Then eventually I was able to sit, I still can't sit in like full lotus, but like I could at least like sit somewhat cross-legged or sit on a chair, at least sit upright, and I could sit long enough where I could actually meditate. And so it's been like this ongoing evolution, as the spiritual path is forever. It just keeps, just understanding the physical body more as a portal for the rest of it. But you have to take care of the physical body like a temple, and you have to penetrate the physical sheath to really unlock the other sheaths, the emotional and spiritual and intelligent sheaths, like all these different pieces, like don't really fully unlock unless you, at least the way I see it and have experienced it, created some sort of freedom in the body, right? It's hard to tap into all these other, quote unquote, esoteric sides of this when the body's so rigid and tight and the energy is not flowing and there's no real love and respect in the body, which I lived, at that point, 28 years of my life, 8 years of pro, even as a junior hockey player, there was no real true respect I was giving myself. Like, let's be honest. Like, I was grinding myself on the ice, grinding myself off the ice, partying way too much, dehydrating the body. It was just like there was no love and respect for the physical, even though I was living fully in the physical, right? I mean, I was like all physical. There was no real understanding of feelings and emotional bodies. That was like for the birds, right? It was like, we don't talk about our feelings. It's like, all the other, hockey players and athletes, just like bury it, we'll tough it out. But you really can't penetrate all that until you deal with the physical, right? You got to unlock it. Just keep unlocking shit.
If it's anything like the fucking military, though, man, same experience. Nobody wants to talk about their feelings unless they get a little drunk. And then all of a sudden, these motherfuckers become philosophers. Yeah, right. And they're the most vulnerable people ever. They're willing to cry in front of you. But that's just a different context. Somebody told me that drunk words are sober thoughts. And I'm that still resonates with me. And I'm like, well, if you're willing to be that type of person when you're drunk, why can't you do that when you're sober? And then it's just the fear that's getting in your way,
That's it.
And so much of that I align with and resonate with. I think for me, similar path, and I got into yoga a little bit as well. And I just started to feel, after years of like bodybuilding and whatnot in the military and whatnot, and I was doing concerts and stuff, or not bodybuilding competitions and stuff, and just fucking not listening to it, not respecting it, not honoring it. I was eating really healthy, but like, you need a rest. The body has its own needs, and I was tight all the time. And then I started doing yoga, and I just found this space in my body all of a sudden. I started to feel like more relaxed, And a week would go by. If I went a few days without doing yoga, I'd be like, damn, my body's tense. I had this new awareness. Yeah. And then I started to notice that I started to have a little bit more space in my mind when I was practicing yoga. And I was like, whoa, there's something here. And then it was, a ceremony that just took my understanding of yoga and the body and the body and the mind connection to a different level. And I see so many of these guys that, kind of like what you're saying and alluded to earlier, live in their heads.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to express themselves, especially with their body. They're living in their heads, and they don't even know like how tense their body is sometimes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a different level of awareness. But when you do gain that insight, I think it just takes your development so much further.
Yeah.
In the beginning of my meditation and mindfulness practice, I could sit and I could meditate, right? But it would be very like, it was still heady. That practice was still heady.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was accustomed to, right? So I tried to logic everything and rationalize everything, and I understood the philosophy behind what the mind was creating, and I am not the same thing as my thoughts and my feelings, and I can create distance from that. But like, I would say my practice went to a whole new level when I really incorporated and became aware of what the body needed and what it was doing. So, you know, before, if I say I was in a triggering situation, I'd have to be really aware and mindful and sort of like on guard of what my thought was going to do so that I didn't react to that thought.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I've started to incorporate the body, I use my body as like a warning sign. Like my body's like, oh, something's off here, dude. Like it's tense all of a sudden in here, or it's hot, or, you know, I feel some butterflies or something. But most people will be like triggered and anxious and angry, and they might go through a whole episode of reactivity before they realize that their body was feeling and all these things, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really understand how much of an instrument the body really is as you evolve in this. Because, like, you know, when you start reading yogic philosophy around asana practice, like, the mindset is just so different than Western mindset, right? Like, we have this, like, work, then recover mindset where we just absolutely abuse the body, we stress the body, we tax the body, and then we're, like, in recovery mode. And I understand its purpose when you're training for something, you know, obviously military. Like, there's some industries that would require this level of thinking, right? You know, athletes and veterans really come to mind, that, you know, and in competitive, I guess, bodybuilders to some capacity. But the idea, but it's not sustainable, right? Like that idea of like grind and rest, eventually will take its toll. Like no one's resting enough for the grind. Like, let's be serious, even though there's a lot of focus on it. The reality is that it eventually takes its toll, and you will get injured, or you'll burn out, or you have a mental, you know, breakdown of some sort. Something will eventually happen when you tax yourself that aggressively. I found with yoga addresses both in the same practice. There's wise effort, you know, effort and ease. There's the idea of it is balance. Like there's actually relaxation in the work, if that makes any sense. So you come
I don't think it makes sense until you experience it.
Well, that's it, right? Yeah, you'd be like, "Oh, you're crazy. How can you do that?" You know. But the idea is, as a net positive, I don't even like using the word exercise, practice, that you come out of it with more energy than you went into it with. The idea is to come out more wakeful, more energized. Prana, life force, right? It's like the whole point of it. You not to be so drained that you spend the rest of the day like hanging on and just like recovery drink after recovery drink, and then like, you know, the body hurts, and, you know, we're stiff and we're sore, and we got to ice this and we got to do that for that. So I've just found that like yoga practice, physical practice of yoga is just addresses it all. Because at the end of the day, if I'm not competing for something physically, what is the goal of quote unquote exercise? It should be to feel well, and I think this is what somatics is approaching exercise, if you want to call it that, just to feel good, to feel better, right? It's not to accomplish anything. It's not to bench press the max. It's not to, you know, press your buddies and friends. It's not for anything else other than to feel good. So unless you're actually training for something, I like to think that most people's goal is just to feel better. And if you feel better, like the weight and all these other things kind of are a byproduct of that. But that, like yoga's goal isn't to lose weight. Yoga's goal isn't
Right.
to be flexible. Yoga's goal, I mean, it has several goals, but it's not about the physical. Like, you have to use the instrument to get to the other pieces, but it's to become more present, obviously, meditative. It's to generate more life force, which is the prana through the breath and the movement, but mainly through the breath, because you don't even have to move to really generate prana. And then I think everything else is a byproduct. The relaxation is part of the work. Like you hear like Sadhguru and some of these yogis talk, like he will argue that we don't need that much sleep. We need relaxation. So you can find relaxation in everything you do, including your work, which in this case we're talking about physical practice of yoga. When you say work, people think it's like work. Yeah, you have to exude energy and you can't save any. Like his whole philosophy, and I subscribe to it too, because I don't need anywhere near the amount of sleep I did back in the day when I was stressing myself out and living that life. But I find relaxation in a lot more areas of my life, including my quote unquote work, which is mainly yoga. And interesting enough, in the last since 2010, so 14 years of practicing physical practice of yoga, like 98% of my practice is the exact same sequence. It's the exact same postures. It's the exact same thing. And that's just like what works for me, because it's just like a nice measuring stick. But like beyond that, it's just like so simple, and I feel great, and I just go based on how I feel. And it's just like, I don't really need to do anything more at this time, because I don't have a reason to. I just feel great. I'm not saying I'll never do more. I've just been like, I guess I've been good with, and mastering these postures and just like feeling into these postures and just really kind of like observing the depth I can go into these ones, instead of every time it's a new this and new that, and you never really get into flow and feel into it. Where now I'm just like, really, I can really like understand some of these teachings after reading the Yoga Sutras, 5 times now, and, BKS Iyengar's books, and, just like making sense of it. So now, like, when I'm in these postures, yes, I'm breathing and I'm present, but now I can almost like feel the teachings. It's like I could almost like make sense of what the hell these guys are talking about now. So a little bit long-winded, I know, but I just think like this idea of wise effort is foreign to most people, because we live in a culture that glorifies overworking and overstressing as a badge of honor of some sort, where I think like we can have both. We can be highly successful and productive individuals, but I don't believe that we need to grind to the core every time to get where we need to go. I think there'll be a little more ease in it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that was a beautiful, maybe I've been a little bit of a tangent, but it's still a beautiful point there. Yeah, I found that too, right? This idea of wise effort in my yoga practice, where it's like you have this deeper listening of and knowing, hey, could I put more effort into this? Or hey, am I striving? Am I striving a little bit too much? And what is that like optimal balance there? And that's something that I don't think you can really like hold in the mind. It's something that has to be sort of intuitive, and you have to listen to the body. Mm-hmm. And then on a cultural perspective, like you've got all these guys now, right, that are they're just reinforcing this fucking hard work, right? They got these coffee mugs that are like, nobody cares, work harder. And you got Alex Hermosio out there saying, right, you don't fucking work hard enough. And then you got David Goggins out there like, you should be running out there every day. And I think there's some value in that stuff if you're the type of person that leans to quitting too early, But there is a big population of people that what they need is stillness. What they need is more balance, Mm-hmm. And yeah. And I also think that there's this thing that happens is, for me, like the doing was what came natural to me. Mm-hmm. That's what came easier to me, because I had something that I had to work for. Something was always in the future that I was going to get some reward. I was going to feel good about myself in the future. So I was always working, and then I started to build up confidence in my ability to work and be resilient. But the hard fucking thing was to take it easy,
Yeah, I know.
was to rest,
That's it.
was to sit in stillness, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like when I approach a lot of the work that I do, like I approach it through the lens of relaxation and workload, right? And it just gives a different perspective right out of the gate, I think, for most people, because most people struggles are to pause and to find the quieter parts of themselves, because the training, the program is so dense. Like this idea of like, and don't get me wrong, like I understand what's the level of effort that's required to navigate this world, right? I mean, there is obviously a level of effort and commitment and resilience and persistence. I just don't think that, like, when you talk about the physical body, and how hard we have to grind the physical body to achieve some of these things, like you mentioned David Goggins there, like I understand where he's going with it. It certainly beats like sitting on the couch and doing nothing. But like, you know, but like the reality is, and I'll speak for myself, there's no way I could do what he does. I would be sore every day, you know what I mean, in my hips and my, you know, like I just like to wake up feeling good and not sore, not stiff. That's my goal, you know what I mean, and feeling energized and productive and focused. But some people like maybe need that extreme level of exercise and discipline to at least shift. Maybe they're so extreme one way. Maybe they need that extreme the other way to maybe find that balance. Eventually, over time, they're going to realize I can't. There's no way I can run 10 miles a day or whatever the hell he's running. You know, there's no way you can do that long term. I'm all about sustainability. Like I ask most of my clients, like right out of the gate, like how long can you sustain what you're doing for? You know, whether they're crossfitting or doing nothing, you know what I mean? Like how long can you go with doing it the way you're doing it? I have so many, you know, especially the guys that are more ultra masculine and just like still in that beast mode mentality, like CrossFitting. They still look jacked and they got the big shoulders and the traps and all that stuff, but their mind is like, you know, it's just chasing it and not feeling in alignment. And it's like, well, how long are you gonna go for like this? Sore all the time, injured all the time, this muscle, that muscle. It's like, and then they have to answer the honest question. Is like, I don't know. I can't go much longer like this. And it's like, well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for muscle mass? Or are you looking for like a sense of peace and relaxation and feeling good, like well-being? Like what is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Because most people don't even know what they're trying to accomplish. They want to lose weight of some sort. They want to build muscle, but like, is there more to it than that? Like if it's just muscle and if it's just being lean, then like, we're obviously trapped in the cult of the body at that point. But like, could we see beyond that? Could we see beyond like do you want to wake up feeling like good, or do you just want to wake up with like 5 extra pounds in your shoulders? Like, what is the purpose here? It's a shift of perspective. I was like, oh, geez, it's like okay. And you know, and I can speak like a little differently to some of these guys because I was 30 pounds heavier. Like when I play, I was 220 pounds, like bulked up and like jacked and thick and all this stuff. So like a lot of people I work with have an understanding of what I did and what I look like and how I lived. So they're like, wow, it's like, you know, they can like see the difference, and I can speak to that experience. But again, most guys are just caught up in this idea of muscle mass and you know, and women too, obviously. Like they're trapped in this idea of focusing all their energy onto just the way the body looks versus the way the body feels and the way the body operates, and then beyond that, like how the body affects the thinking and the mind, right? How stress, obviously physical stress, it just continues on to be mental, emotional, and spiritual stress, as you know. So
the spirit there too. I think, you know, even going back to what you're talking about with the fear body and stuff, I'd love to learn all about what you got going on. What is your primary focus these days? But I have been seeing some of this great work that you've been doing with, I think it's called Mind Champs.
yeah.
Dude, talk to me about that. That shit looks pretty. I want to hop in there. I might have to fly up to Philly to just hop in one day, man.
Slide in whenever you want, whenever you're in the area. So all my work is under this scope of, I think I've landed on the word mindfulness. You know, yoga's got its baggage. They all got their baggage. I think mindfulness seems to be the most digestible word for people that maybe don't even understand it. I think they can maybe understand the essence of it. I think yoga is just more about like, bastardizing, physical exercise of the East. And, there's a couple other words that just kind of get lost in it. So I've landed on the word mindfulness. So everything I do is in that world. So I coach, a lot of athletes, but really just anybody. So a lot of like personal coaching, group coaching. And then I've recently, in the last, I guess, year or so, has been taking that mindfulness concept and trying to interface it into hockey, youth hockey specifically. Is I see that the need for it is all across the board. But getting ahead of this with the youth athletes, and there's such a need for it. Obviously, I've seen these guys overtrain the body, overtrain the skill. Like, how much bigger, faster, stronger, more skilled can we get? The gaps between the ears, we all know it, right? In every sport, in every industry. Yeah. It's always between the ears. So I see a gap. No one's doing it, at least on the East Coast here, at least in the Philly area. No one's teaching it from, I guess, the depth that I'm teaching it, because now I've incorporated rhythmic mindfulness in the drumming piece, which, as you know, teaching sitting meditation is nearly impossible to most people, let alone, a bunch of young hockey players that are stiff and excited to get on the ice. So the drum seems to be an amazing tool to teach the understanding of meditation, at least understanding flow state or understanding presence, because what they're experiencing while they're drumming, even with no experience, musical background, they're experiencing the same thing they're experiencing on the ice, because as I mentioned earlier, hockey is a creative sport. They want to be in a flow state, but it's engaging, it's fun, there's a communal team building component. So the drum has really been a huge focus on a lot of my work, because it interfaces with obviously the mindfulness piece, the somatics, whether you're playing for somebody or you're creating a drum circle of some sort. There's an energy, there's a feeling, there's a level of happiness that's increased. Emotional, just the emotional intelligence that it kind of helps these players tap into, raising the vibration. At the very least, they leave there smiling and fun and having fun. But it's not like that. So Mind Champ is exclusively for right now hockey, youth hockey players, and that's kind of the focus, is introducing mindfulness through hockey, and the drum leading that. But now, like, since I've been like hell bent on banging the drum, no pun intended, is like the drum just keeps. I just keep like some of these spiritual leaders talk about, like, find your excitement and follow that excitement until there's no longer any excitement. I haven't found anything like this, like I had felt with hockey, where it was like, as long as I could remember, as early as I could remember, I dreamt of playing in the NHL. I had this excitement. You know what I mean? I didn't understand psychology, didn't understand obviously my emotional body. It was just something I loved to do. This feeling that I got when I played on the ice, pond hockey originally when I first started. No structure, no rigidness, pure freedom, pure creativity. But this energy of excitement that I kept following without any intention, right? No, there's no mindfulness around it. But now having these understandings and having this feeling with the drum, it's the same feeling I got growing up with playing hockey. It was like, I just love this feeling. I want to teach it. And it interfaces with all the stuff that I'm doing, right? It interfaces with yoga, interfaces with meditation, it interfaces with, if you want to talk about the teaching of the primordial energy of the universe, right? The drum is as ancient as humans have walked on, essentially outside of the physical body, first instrument of percussion. And then how it interfaces with communication and how it interfaces with community and connectivity. So all these things that I'm trying to teach indirectly, you can actually teach through the drum. So, and then my next step is actually, well, I'm kind of already doing a little bit now, interfacing with the plant medicine world, and obviously bringing that level of vibration and. The neuroscience supports it. Shamanic drumming is one thing, but then there's this whole other world of, 7, 8 beats per second, and making the rhythm non-predictable, so the brain actually has to try and entrain with it. And then there's this whole, now the mind is like on the beat, and now it's getting out of the mind, and now it's getting into feeling, and it's just like this, whole world of.
You're gonna send me down a fucking rabbit hole now. When I get home, I'll have to go pull up all the research on that.
It's wild. Yeah, you would love it, man, because I know how much essence you pour into your learnings and everything, and your spiritual path. Because I just had this aha moment actually down in Jamaica. Just like Jeremy, if you remember, Jeremy would not have been there when you were there, but. He's a world-renowned musician down in Jamaica, but every time he had this djembe drum, this West African djembe drum, And I just, every time I heard it, it was just like it was awakening something within me. It was just like what the drum does. It awakens the spirit, right? It's generating some sort of life force, some sort of vibration, exactly what it does in shamanic drumming and in traditional indigenous communities. So then came back home, ordered a shitty one on Amazon, and just started, teaching myself. Then eventually got some lessons from Jeremy, and then started like studying the drum and studying the essence of it, and every day it was just like more and more having these aha moments. Well, of course the Buddhists had the fish drum. I got one right here. The Buddha, tapping their little fish drum. And then it's like every culture had their version of it, and it made a shitload of sense. And so then recently, my girlfriend got us private lessons with this master djembe player. He's a West African djembe player, like 20 minutes down the road from me. So we've been taking West African drumming lessons, and then you understand, like, you're hearing him speak to their culture using the drum. He's a griot, and if you study what they are, they're essentially a culture of storytellers. They don't call themselves performers, because when they play the drum, they don't entertain. It's all about the community. Everyone's participating in it. But just like learning the teachings of like his specific culture in Senegal, West Africa, in a country in West Africa there. And like, they use like driving out spirit, right? Driving out the dark energies. Like we hear where it's like, oh, we're driving out depression, or, we have a list of names. They're just like, just driving out negative energies and raising that vibration through the drum. So the long and short of it is mindfulness, but the drum seems to be now for me, outside of my physical body, my go-to vehicle to kind of bring it all together in some way, shape, or form. It's just an engaging, fun exercise. I like to get into more corporate team building stuff with the drum, because again, going in there and teaching sitting meditation to a bunch of, corporate office workers is probably not going to be that easy. But if you bring them into a circle together and you raise up the vibration, you teach team building, you teach focus, concentration. You can make so many analogies through rhythm too, right? The rhythm of life, the rhythm of breath, or the heartbeat rhythm. The seasons. You can go on. Rhythm is everywhere. So it just seems like an easy thing to teach. And it's digestible. People can do it. And understand it a little bit more easily, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what that's the essence. It's pretty palpable, even just watching your stories and your videos and whatnot with the kids and the youth hockey players and whatnot, something that they can grab onto and gets them moving, but maybe into a little bit of a state of flow, and where you can kind of connect the dots of like mindfulness and this thing. Because yeah, just like you said, trying to teach it to kids or to a corporate environment, sitting meditation and mindfulness, that's a real challenge, So it's very innovative, and I love what you've done there. And
thanks.
Yeah, I mean, definitely if I'm in Philly, I'm gonna have to hop in over there, dude.
Oh yeah. If you're in Philly, you definitely come by here. I got more than enough drums for you to play.
I've been kind of
together a drum circle.
I've been listening to Krishna Das. You know who Krishna Das is?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so like Ram Dass and Krishna Das were sort of like peers from Babaji or Neem Karoli Baba, right? Mm-hmm. And but Krishna Das chanting was his thing. Mm-hmm. And that's what you mentioned about just following what you love, or like what interests you and what you're passionate about, right? And he was taking some Q&As, and some guy was like, oh, like I've been trying to chant, but like I'm not really feeling it. When is it, do I push through? What do I do? And he's like, just do what you fucking want. Yeah. He keeps saying that. He's like, just do what you want. And he brought up this hilarious story with Neem Karoli Baba, where he's actually, he spent years in India studying and, being mentored like Ram Dass with Neem Karoli Baba. And he's getting ready to leave. And he's like, he doesn't know what to do. And he goes to Neem Karoli Baba, and he's like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I should just stay here. And he's like, no, you got to fucking go. He's like, it's your time. You got to go. And you do know what you want to do. He's like, he's like, no, I don't know what I want to do. He's like, yes, you do. And Krishna Das is like recalling this story, and he's like, he had this way where, maybe that's where just if you want to call it his level of consciousness, his vibration or whatever, he could read what other people were feeling and intuiting and thinking. And he knew that Krishna Das had been celibate for those 2 or 3 years that he was there.
Really?
And what he wanted to do was go home and break that celibacy, you know? And he's like, what Krishna Das realized was like, he was right. And Ram Dass has pointed to this too, like sort of once you start your evolution or this path, this journey of spiritual and personal growth, and you get some of these awakenings or awareness, you can't really go back.
That's right.
You might regress a little bit, maybe here and there. That's life, right? We always maybe we make 2 steps forward and a step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But like, you're never gonna go back all the way back, because you're just not that same person.
That's right.
And maybe you have to, like, it's helped me to develop a little bit, or relinquish a little bit of control and maybe pressure that I put on myself to become this idealized version of myself, and like some sort of made up timeline that I've created for myself. But it's given me some space of like, hey, I still have these feelings or these judgmental thoughts or desires and whatnot, and maybe those just have to play the course. But even like you're almost like your spirit grows out of that stage. When you're done with it, you're done with it. And so Krishna Das's lesson there was like, if you want to chant, chant. If you don't want to chant, don't chant. Do something else. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that story, and yeah, and I'm continuing to learn this. It's just like finding what excites you, and they say like follow the most exciting thing as long as you possibly can, because like you think of yoga, and most people's minds immediately go to like posture, but there's bhakti yoga, which chanting and music would the Kirshan chants, all that stuff would fall under, and then there's Kriya yoga, and like. The stuff all kinds of falls under this umbrella of yoga, if you even want to use that word. But like, there's so many things that can raise your spirits and make you feel better, right? And it's like, it's just finding what that is. And it could be painting, it could be drawing, it could be clay molding, it could be helping a neighbor out. And I think like whatever excites you, I think this is where like when I teach, like I there's no like one size fits all. I'm not trying to get anybody to subscribe to the way I do things. I just can share from my experience of how it's helped me, and then really the template is just finding what excites your heart, and then once you figure that out, I'm not saying abandon your job and like go all in on if it's journaling, whatever it is, but like at some point maybe that excitement does feed into like the ikigai idea. Maybe you can make some money and a living doing what you actually love to do and brings you the most excitement. But I think like if you can just find those things and follow them, eventually it will keep leading you to where you need to go. You just ride that excitement until there's no longer excitement. They pick the next exciting thing, but like that excitement can end in a period of time. But it can extend, for long periods of time, if that makes any sense. But until it doesn't excite you anymore, like why would you stop doing it? And if it's something doesn't excite you, like why would you do that because someone else is telling you to do that? Like I think the cold plunge is one of those things for me. It's just like, okay, everyone's doing the cold plunges. I understand the science behind it, but then you got like a group of people that are overkill. Like, I know several people that have gotten sick, you know what I mean? Like they're going from hot and cold and like overdoing it. Now it's becoming competition, 12 minutes, 13 minutes. It's like, it's like unhealthy. And, and then there's some people just, like I actually saw a podcast between Sadhguru and Wim Hof. And, there's the science supports what Wim's doing. But then you got Sadhguru, and there's like, he'll never step foot in a cold plunge because he's like, I don't really need to. And he's smiling. They're kind of going back and forth. But like, you don't need to go in the cold plunge if you don't want to. If it doesn't excite you, like I understand there's value in it, and if you do it the right way, it could flush inflammation. It can do a lot of good things. But there's other things you can do that if it's a little more exciting and still in the world of wellness and done properly, you can also choose that. You know, if you don't have to go to hot yoga either. You don't have to do yoga. You can do qigong. It's something like if whatever feels good and makes you excited, do that. But I think we just get locked into like we got to do it this way because that guy's doing it that way, and you know, the culture is just like recreating an unhealthy culture. Where it's just like my whole thing is self culture. Is like figure out what works best for you. Like listen to all the teachers, including the earth. Is the biggest and most important teacher, and just figure out what's best for you. Some foods, like healthy foods, don't digest well for certain people. Doesn't mean Mother Nature effed them. It's just like, okay, well, I'm just maybe that avocado doesn't digest well for me. Maybe I just got to go through a different vegetable or fruit or whatever. And the same thing applies for all these creative expressions and jobs. Like just find what you love. You just follow your heart, right? I mean, that's what it is. I mean, every spiritual teaching, religious teaching is like follow your heart, or you hear this at school, you hear this in the workplace, follow your heart. What does that mean, right? I mean, is that love? Is that just like following whatever makes you feel good? I guess, right? I mean, I think we've just lost our way. I think whether it's intuition that's been abandoned, or probably that, and just listening to other people's programs, listening to other people's conditioning, and believing that. Oh, my mom wants me to be a doctor, I'm going to be a doctor, but I really want to be a musician. It's like, well, okay. Well, then you're always going to feel that tug of war. Yeah, you might make some more money in being a doctor, but where's your heart? It's still over here, and you've like never really kind of followed that, followed your heart. So there's going to be discord, and there's going to be eventually a crossroads. I think eventually you'll have to at least address it. Whether it's in the right way or the wrong way, that's to be determined. But there's always something bringing you away from, or so there's always something drawing your heart to it, and you just got to figure what that is. I think that's to me what I've found now. Again, it's the second time in my life I found something that like is like clearly a sign from the universe. One I was unconscious of and just like followed it at a young age and just like loved it, and now I'm just kind of like taking what I've learned from the unconscious, first time around at this, and like applying this in a more conscious way, but it really lands up being the same thing. I feel like a kid, I feel like a child, some version of a child. Like it's play for me. Yeah, if that makes any sense, versus feeling like work.
It makes total sense, at least to me. I've been reading this book on Carl Jung's work, and it's not written by Jung. It's written by somebody sort of laying out all his foundational works and kind of what they mean. And he had this concept of be unconscious, obviously, but sort of starting out from a place of unconscious and doing things. And then you go through this awareness and this development process of figuring out like sort of an awakening process, right? Your complexes, your triggers, your personality. And then you get to this place of consciousness, and then you do kind of you kind of bring back this, like, in a way you go back to what you were, but from a more conscious state. Yeah. And this has come up a lot for me too, is maybe you knew this, but in Sanskrit, right, like bodhicitta is awakened or enlightened mind, but the word chitta is the same for mind, and heart is the same. So is it awakened mind or awakened heart? And maybe that goes into this connection, right? We talk about the breath and HRV and stuff like this, and the science between the mind and the heart's connection. But going back to what you say about following your heart, that has been one of the biggest but also most challenging lessons I've learned in recent years, so
it's a hard one for most people, because you said it earlier and you kind of just alluded to it now. Most people are living in the head, they're living in the thinking mind, and when they say like the metaphor for opening the heart, right, it's the spiritual heart. There has to be a softening, and you have to start tapping into feelings, right? And start following that compass versus the mind's compass, is the way I see it or feel it. And I guess that's intuition. It's like, I think what we were mentioning is kind of what Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about. It's like the brain-heart coherence, right? It's like they have to be in alignment. so the brain, the brain processes what you're feeling, right? You feel first, and then you think. I think most people just abandon the feelings, and they go right away to like trying to intellectualize the scenario and say, well, the mind's going to help me figure this one out. Where if you just followed the heart, because you already know. I read somewhere that there's more receptor sites on the heart, than in the brain. So obviously we feel, there's this field, and we feel. And I think this is why, this might be the conspiracy theorist in me, but like the spiritual booby traps is about numbing, right? It's about, well, if you're feeling a little sad, well, we got a drug for that. We'll just mask that feeling of sadness, where the sadness itself isn't the problem. It's just staying in that chronic energy of sadness, over time. But it's just like, okay, let's feel it, and then like let's grieve it, and then like be able to process it and move on. Or in this culture we're living in, it's just like it's like feelings are bad, But when you numb feeling, when you numb emotion, well, then you're really putting people back into the head, and you become a slave in your own body. Is the way I see it. But it's hard to feel and have intuition and like follow your heart when everything is numbed, through drugs like that or alcohol. Obviously, there's several other numbing agents. Then eventually you just lose all your intuition. That's the world we're living in. There's no common sense. There's no everyone just follows orders exactly the way they are, and without ever having second guess on it.
Yeah. I think I want to be mindful of your time. I know that you got to take off. You got adult parent duties, and but man, maybe another time we can get into this. But what you just brought up there in the spiritual aspect of numbing, I think is a really important conversation, especially as psychedelics kind of continue to get more and more popular, and maybe they're more accepted into society. Because I imagine, you've been probably around the space longer than I have, but we've been around it for a little while now at this point, and in this community of spirituality and plant medicine, I've seen a lot of people that I think are sort of spiritually bypassing and numbing themselves by either avoiding people that they deem everybody is toxic if they're not up to these things that I deem are healthy or spiritually that I co-sign, or I'm just going to sort of run away from society and just move to Costa Rica, or maybe I just won't confront this thing that I won't have that tough conversation with somebody because it's not worth my time because the vibes ain't there or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you briefly want to touch on that, but I would love to get your perspective on that at some point.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I definitely see this in the psychedelic space, and I could maybe speak to my own experience. There might have been a phase there where I was doing a version of that too. You get excited and you're learning, and I think I've seen a lot of people come out of these experiences and they think they know it all, right? And it's like, now they want us to stand on top of the rooftop and scream and chant, and they haven't really done any bit of work. They just had like basically a sniff of what God is, and there's so much work in it, right? I mean, it just kind of always points back to the work that's required, but people that aren't used to putting in the work, or that maybe haven't had any level of maybe they're just beginning the spiritual journey. If you've never actually had any sort of practice at all, in that 4 or 5 hour journey, it just seems like so obvious, right? Whoa, it's just like the awareness is so there, and the consciousness is so expanded, and of course we're love, we're all connected, and all these like realizations, and then it's like, and then slowly the journey ends, and then it's like, okay, there's this nice glow, but then it's like, okay, and then now we actually got to go and do the work. There's so many people that struggle with doing the work, right? They have integration calls, and they have a couple calls. Oh yeah, let's talk about our experiences. But then it's like, well, then how are we living like a month later, 2 months later, and really just embodying the teachings, I guess you could say. But there's so many people that don't want to embody the teachings. They'll just like, okay, well, 2 weeks later, I'll go back to Costa Rica and we'll jump into another journey, or go to somewhere else and we'll work with another shaman. And it's just like, well, the integration is beyond the calls, right? The integration is the way of life that's adopted. Probably should be a beginning of being adopted before you even went to the journey, right? The pre-integration. It's like, let's start maybe fasting from some of these things that are drowning us, right? Let's start detoxifying the body a little bit before we go and ingest. Because if you're seriously committed about this, then there has to be some level of ownership. The medicine itself is not going to do. I shouldn't say like that, because I've actually seen some pretty profound things where it's like, wow, it's like that it actually did help them like in real time, but like those are, I want to say, anomalies to some degree. Like the experiences that are more transformative for longer periods of time are the ones that people are committed in, the ones that are actually engaging in some level of practice to sustain the teachings and like embody what was learned, and then extending that feeling and that, raising that vibration by yourself without the aid of a psychedelic or another plant medicine or another outside tool. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, Mother Nature is abundant, it's provided for us, right? But at some point, I think it sounds like the idea is to be fully empowered, right? And at some point where we can generate this life force without psychedelics, we can have these realizations other ways, or what I mean. We can find peace without cannabis, or find peace without some of these other things. But there's certainly amazing tools to get you to feel it and sit with it. But to what you were saying earlier, I think a lot of people just spiritually bypass the actual essence of what it's teaching. So then every time you come back, it's kind of teaching you or showing the same exact thing again, because you haven't addressed it. Until you address it, it meets you where you are, right? So it's not going to show you something new necessarily if you haven't addressed what it told you to do last time. Just keep showing you in a different way, probably more aggressive way, and it might slap you around even harder next time. You'd be like, idiot, I told you this last time, and you're back for more,
That's been my experience, man, somewhat. Like, I remember, honestly, not that long after I started, maybe I didn't fall into it right away, but then I was like, man, maybe I'm ready for a new one in like a couple months after my first experience. And I went into it, and it was like, it gave me some lessons, and then, another couple months went by, and I was like, maybe I'll try it again, see if I get some more lessons, or I'm feeling like this is getting a little rusty. Let's knock off some rust. And that was it. It was like loud. It was like, I told you what the answers were. You know what the answers are. Now go do the work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, man, I really appreciate you coming to chat with me today. It's been nice to connect with you. We haven't talked since, was it last year we were in Jamaica? It's already been a fucking year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You headed to Burning Man this year?
I am, I'm heading tomorrow, actually.
Oh, okay, I kind of had a hunch that's when you were like, I'm traveling.
Yeah. Originally wasn't going to go, and then I had something fall through, and I don't know, how the universe kind of lays itself out sometimes, and here we are going again. So looking forward to it. It's I go, I just go there with like a completely different mindset than I would have 10 years ago. Had I gone to something, or maybe even longer, 14 years ago, would be like, let's party and festival. And you have some good times, but there's so much to learn there. It's just like, you just realize how creative people are and how much capacity and potential mankind has if you just come together with at least some level of the same, the same ideas, the same thinking level of consciousness. But so it just shows you what you can do with, people, a bunch of people towing in the right direction, they're the same direction. But just observe and just watch people. There's like the amount of creativity and collaboration and just like high vibe energy. It's just it's a special place for sure. So looking forward to experiencing that again. Mm-hmm.
Well, safe travels.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy it, man. We'll catch you on the flip side.
We'll do this again.
Let's do it, dude. Let's do it. Let's chop it up a little bit more.
Absolutely. Appreciate you.
All right, brother. Appreciate you too.